Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm David Jones, and I'm sitting next to our resident intellectual, Jay Iyer.
Well, thank you, David. I'm happy to be here. I'm Jay Iyer. I'm a assistant professor of public policy and public administration at Texas Southern University, and we have a great show today, David.
Yeah, and it's about equality of all things, as far as I know, but certainly the most recent discussions about policy as it relates to women, and the Me Too movement, transgender issues, and the like are certainly on the table. But you know, we're not ruling anything out. Our guests are Jonathan Saenz, who is the president of Texas Values and of the Texas Values Action Group, which is the dangerous part of his organization. Dr. Elizabeth Gregory is with us. She is the director of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at the great University of Houston that happened to give me a degree. Kali Cohn is a staff attorney for the ACLU of Texas and has a couple of the issues that we've been talking about that are on her plate. Let me ask you, Jonathan, are you happy about Iowa passing a bill that's called the Fetal Heartbeat Bill, after which no abortions can be provided?
Well, first of all, David, I just want to say thank you to the entire University of Houston community. As a proud graduate of the University of Houston Law Center, I've been licensed since 2003. It's great to be back home. You know, I was born and raised in Houston, a lot of family here, so I just want everyone to know how grateful I am for that opportunity. So we appreciate that. And, you know, look, the bill that was passed, I think, is something that's been coming for a long time. We've seen opportunities this in other places, and I think it just continues to show people and match up with what we know about the issue of life. And I think, you know, you continue to see more and more young people embrace that. When you look at the changes in technology as well, you see more and more people getting involved, and you see so many women, too, that are involved in this issue regarding legislative-wise. But, I mean, this is a very human issue. When you think about the heartbeat, it's hard to imagine anything that's more about humanity and more of a representation of life than the heartbeat itself.
And so as a lawyer, you understand that you're going against the Constitution of the United States because you know the bill is unconstitutional as it is written, right?
Well, that may be some people's opinion, but, you know, we'll see what happens if this works its way through the court. I mean, and you hear that all the time. I mean, I've worked on legislation.
Do you really
I've worked on court cases.
think a heartbeat bill is going to pass the Supreme Court if it ever gets there?
Well, I mean, it depends on who's in the Supreme Court, as we know. You know, and so, I mean, look at the issues.
You're counting on three Trump, him running for the third term.
Well, the president has certainly made a lot of important nominations to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I do think, though, over time that we continue to see people very comfortable with this issue. We don't pass legislation here in the state of Texas, at least I don't, with someone else's opinion about what may or may not be constitutional. And so, look, this is about honoring life. This is about respecting life. And I think that's something that our Constitution should protect.
And Dr. Gregory, let me ask you, the chancellor, I understand, is asking 10,000 employees at the University of Houston to undergo sensitivity training with respect to women's issues and discrimination. Did you have anything to do with the formation of that policy, and do you approve of it?
I did not directly, though I have been involved in discussions over the years with Richard Baker, who was the EEOS director, who evolved that program. And it's been something that the university has been growing over years. Dr. Baker developed a salutations online sexual assault program for incoming students a couple of years ago, and this is a sort of stepping up of the kind of programming that a lot of people will be familiar with from their work, where you go online and you watch a video and then you take yes or no answers to various questions, and if you pass, then you're sex assault free or something like that, and you can go on. And instead of doing that, which is very unengaging way of getting people to think about this, they have produced a program where big groups of faculty, maybe 100 or so, come together and hear a presentation, which is really student focused, and it's about how much of the dynamic of reporting and being what in those online programs was frequently about, you're responsible for this, and if you don't do that, you'll be blamed. And it was taking the direction, much more proactive and positive direction of how do you most effectively help students? And if a student comes to you and reports that there's been an incident, then you can tell that student, this is not privileged or confidential information. I'm going to talk to somebody in the counseling service because we want to make sure that you get whatever help you need. So it creates a dynamic of conversation instead of one where people feel like, oh, I don't know what to do, I'm unprepared, and I feel sort of shy about it. So I think it's a really positive transformation.
Dr. Gregory, have you seen kind of an increase in terms of students reporting incidences or sort of the national conversation? How much have you seen, at least on campus, and maybe some of the studies that you've done in terms of how it's being dealt with at a campus level?
Well, I was actually just talking to one of the campus sexual assault officers, I guess that would be the title. And yes, when you start introducing this kind of programming, then people's consciousness about it raises, and they feel, first of all, more secure that if they do report, that they will be heard in a friendly way and not made victimized again. And it also works, so that's true for students, but it's also true in terms of the faculty, that they are also more informed about needing to report. For instance, if a student stands up and gives a report about something in the English department and says, well, this story that we're reading reminds me of the time that I was assaulted last week or last year, then the faculty member has to be proactive and say to that student, I'm going to talk to the counseling people, they'll be in touch with you to find out what you need. So there's reporting from both directions, which I think, and in a way that is focused on helping the students. So I think that's positive.
And Ms. Cohn, on your website, I saw that you were interested or focusing on LGBTQ issues as well as famously the bathroom bill. So I would think that you would have a position on what was called Senate Bill 3, and I would think that you would have a position on the Trump ban of transgenders serving in the military. Mr. Saenz probably is in opposition to you, but maybe you can tell us why you are opposed to those two things if you are.
Sure, absolutely. So SB 3 was one of the bills, as you called it, a bathroom bill, one of the bills that was aimed at targeting transgender people and not permitting transgender people from using the bathroom that is consistent with the life that they live authentically every day. The bathroom bill, it was promoted under this guise of privacy and safety. But really what this was an attempt to discriminate against trans people in Texas. And we were glad to see that bill defeated in the regular session and its counterparts defeated during the special session because trans people need to be part of our communities, or vibrant parts of our communities, and by refusing somebody the ability to go to the bathroom in public, you're effectively refusing that person the ability to participate in everyday life. With regard to the transgender military ban, that was promulgated by the Trump administration, basically prohibiting transgender military members from serving or enrolling in the military, and has since been placed on hold by various federal courts. The courts have found that policy discriminates against transgender people. I think the really important thing about that policy was that the Department of Defense did a prolonged study on whether the precise issues that President Trump used to justify the ban. What would this affect military cohesiveness and various other things? And the Department of Defense concluded no, it would not. And in fact, prohibiting trans people from serving openly does the exact opposite. And nevertheless, the Trump administration put in place this policy, and we're glad to see the federal courts have enjoined it.
Well, there are various reverends who are behind him on that. So. He's got his supporters where he needs them.
Okay, Jonathan, I wanted to talk to you guys. So I know you've got your organization, Texas Values, and we can talk about this kind of globally. But do you see the state? Do you see sort of Texas Values as kind of a fixed thing? Because the reason I ask is we know that sort of public attitudes have shifted over time, particularly as it relates to the role of women in society, gender, the role of the acceptance of the LGBTQ community. Do you feel like you're sort of holding on to something that's that's sort of slipping away, or is there a real common ground that could potentially be achieved in Texas, in a new Texas, in terms of values?
Well, as a native Houstonian and a fifth-generation Texan, kind of in response to some of the things Mrs. Cohn was saying about these issues, look, there's strong support for the issues of religious liberty, of privacy, and things of that nature here in Texas, and they continue to show that strength. I mean, just look at what happened in Houston, and so you reference what happened at the state capitol on the Privacy Act, Senate Bill 3. That was in response to government entities that were rogue, that were out of control, like the mayor, Anise Parker here in Houston, who tried to force these policies through for sexual orientation, gender identity, that we've not seen honored at the federal level or the state level. And there were concerns that it would allow men into women's bathrooms, that it would also punish private businesses. Let's not forget, Senate Bill 3 specifically said that it had nothing to do with private businesses. It was only about government property. So what happened on that issue? There was a vote here in Houston. It was a historic vote, 61-39. If you want to know what the people think, check the ballot box. And it was very clear on that vote that they were rejecting legislation that would have allowed and forced businesses to allow men into women's bathrooms. And then fast forward this past March, if you look at the Republican primary, this issue about protecting privacy was on the primary ballot. It was over 90% of Republican primary voters said that they wanted government protection on privacy issues so you wouldn't have men going into women's bathrooms. That's what you have when you talk about the transgender issue. That's just a natural effect, and that really is the goal of a lot of folks to do that as well. But I mean, you look at the issue in the state of religious liberty, when you have people that are being forced or being threatened to be put in jail, when you have businesses that are being put out of business like Jack Phillips, when you have little elementary school children like Shiloh. She's in Dripping Springs ISD, just out of Austin. You know how she found out that Dripping Springs changed their policy about who was going into what bathroom? She came home to her daddy and said, "Daddy, there was a boy in my bathroom today." That's how the parents are being informed about these issues. And so the response is the state is saying, look, we're going to get involved in these issues. And the only reason that the legislation didn't pass at the state level is because you had a couple of people in leadership in the House. Joe Strauss, he's no longer there. So are some of the other people that were doing that. So when we look at the ballot box, when we look at the outcome of elections here in Houston and also for candidates, we continue to see strong support for Texas values.
Kali, is that right? Is Jonathan right that the public has spoken, people have spoken, and this is the direction they want to take?
So I disagree with Mr. Saenz on a couple of points. The first point.
That's surprising.
The first point that I'd like to clarify is the timeline. And so everything that happened in Houston happened prior to the events in the legislature. And Houston, the Equal Rights Ordinance fight was the first time we really saw a deliberate campaign to spread misinformation about who trans women are and what a trans person being and using the bathroom means. And I think, what we saw during the legislative session was that after people understood what those attacks for what they were, after people understand who trans people are, that's why we see things like SB 6 and SB 3 not succeed in the legislature. And we will continue to fight to do that. The other thing I'd like to clarify is that the bathroom bill, Mr. Saenz discussed it as men using women's bathrooms. Transgender women are women, and they're seeking to use bathrooms just like every other woman. There was a lot of discussion during the legislative session as well as during the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance campaign about dangers of cisgender men accessing the bathroom, pretending to be women, that no one really had concerns about transgender women using the bathroom. It was really about people masquerading and entering the bathroom. All of the things that people were pointing to as risks are already prohibited under our criminal law. What we're talking about is transgender women trying to access the bathroom so that they can be part of our society.
Let me tell you a quick story that I heard that was on NPR, I believe, during the Barbara Bush funeral. A journalist said that he had talked with a transgendered person who had approached Mrs. Bush, or she had approached him, and she asked him, exactly what does this mean to be transgender? Tell me how that works. And he explained it all to her, and she said, you deserve every right that any American has. I fully support you. So you're going against the Constitution and Barbara Bush.
You're asking me if I'm was this in the context of her being her private business being punished if she didn't allow a man who said he was a woman to go into? I mean, we have to put this in proper context.
But let's talk about the business argument for a second here, because
it's relevant.
Right, and I completely understand. But that's why the Texas Association of Business. That's why. That's certainly why Speaker Strauss. That's why most of the Chamber of Commerce business community was in opposition to what you're saying. But before, and I will let you get response, but I want to bring in Dr. Gregory into this conversation. How do you see sort of transgender, this issue and LGBT issues in general fitting into sort of the larger context of some of the issues surrounding women's rights and the Me Too movement in general? I know that's some work that you've done.
Well, we're talking about equality, and we're talking about the dynamics of gender, which has historically been a work assignment system that has put certain people into certain kinds of paid and unpaid work and assigned them sort of a natural status, when in fact it's just the result of the social ingrained expectations. So what we're seeing is this huge shift around issues of work, because the entire playing field of what work needs to be done, how long people live, what kind of way they can participate in the workforce is changing in an enormous way. And it's not all about fertility. So one way to look at the dynamics of sort of the exclusion of LGBT people historically in the public social dynamic has to do with fertility and the fact that there's been a sort of focus on getting the production of more bodies. And that was, part of the dynamic in which women were also basically made into producers of bodies. That was their job. And so giving making certain things outlawed, certain kinds of behaviors, had to do with these ideas of how you were going to get enough people to survive for the next generation to do the work in the farm. We don't need those farm workers. People survive a lot longer. You have many fewer deaths early on. You have people living 30 years longer this century than they did 100 years ago. So the dynamics of the participation of people in the workforce are hugely changed, and as a result, all of these issues about workforce assignments and gender roles are completely in flux. And we're operating with these sort of legacy systems that really do not make sense in the work environment and the reality of people's lives that we are now facing.
There is a legacy system that we can talk about that was in the news today, and I can ask each of you to give a one-word answer, yes or no, about whether or not you approve of there no longer being a Boy Scouts of America. It is the Scouts of America, because women are allowed to join. Are you happy with that? Just up or down?
My personal opinion, yes.
You?
No, because they're basically trying to push out the Girl Scouts.
Oh, I see. Well,
their brand is going down, the Girl Scouts are going up, so they're trying to get market share.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. How about you, Jonathan?
Well, I think it's concerning because they're not honoring what their membership has said in the past, what they want, and that's why they've gone down this road. And then, in number two, but you have groups like Trail Life USA that are alternatives to that are growing in numbers every day and year. And so, we'll see what happens when they continue to change and people have more options.
No, go ahead, Dave.
Well, I was going to say, you are, as it says on your website, you are a defender of Texas values, and you want to preserve and protect the culture of family values in Texas. I would assume that extends to people whose values are derived from reading the Quran, who are reading the Torah as well as the Bible. And I would think that you would be able to tell us whether or not you are defending each of those perspectives and those value systems that come out of each of those major religious books.
Yeah, we continue, as we always have, to support First Amendment religious liberty rights of all Americans. And so, that's something we're very proud of. And you look at the issue of Texas values. The state of Texas has always been about faith, family, and freedom. You look at some of the letter that Travis wrote when he was in the Alamo, you see that depicted.
That was back when they were hoping to be a slave state, as I recall.
So if you look at what's happening, though, you got states like California, they want to dictate to us. They want us to feel bad if we support religious liberty rights because they want to punish entities like the Catholic Church. They want to pass laws, and so does the ACLU, that punishes private businesses for following their beliefs that God made them male and female, and punish them and put them out of the business if they don't allow men to go into women's bathrooms however they characterize themselves. We've seen this litigation against the church. We've seen it against faith-based entities. We've seen people that are in LGBT advocacy wanting to use the government power to punish people of faith. And I think that's something that we can all agree the First Amendment says you should not be doing.
I'm sure you're agreeing that the Muslim ban was was an act against people of faith. And I'm asking you whether
I support religious liberty of all.
Well, then tell us when
So.
you've been involved in defending a Muslim who is being disadvantaged because of his religion.
Sure, we've done that work at the Capitol where we've had groups that are not Christian, if that's the question you're getting at, where we've worked with them on legislative issues.
I said Muslim. I didn't say non-Christian.
Yeah, we've had Muslims that have worked with us on religious liberty issues at the Capitol. Absolutely. So on our policy work. So, and the organization that I worked for before, First Liberty, has also been involved in representing non-Christian entities, including Muslims. So, to answer your question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Kali, what would you say to what Jonathan says in terms of, are you trying to litigate businesses out of existence? Are you trying to force these guys to go against what they want as it relates to bathroom policies and businesses as a whole, policies as a whole?
So I think, the ACLU, like Texas values, supports religious freedom and fights vigorously for religious freedom. Religious freedom is it is the first thing mentioned in the Bill of Rights. It's among our most important values. But religious freedom does not give the power to discriminate. Religious freedom is in place as a tool for us to protect our ability to believe. And so I think what we're seeing now is an increased movement to use religion as a tool to discriminate. And this isn't new. This is something that happened, in the wake of the civil rights movement, during the civil rights movement, when Black Americans were having their rights realized in the federal courts and legislatures. We saw people arguing that they didn't have to provide the same public accommodations, access to Black people, people of color, because it was against their religious beliefs. There was a case out of South Carolina that involved a barbecue restaurant where the owner argued that he didn't want to serve any Black patrons because it was against his religious beliefs to have races intermingle. So this is not something that's new, and the courts then said, religious liberty is an important value in our Constitution, and it's here to protect us. It's not here to be used as a tool to discriminate. And so we're seeing many of those same arguments today, and for that reason, I disagree with Mr. Saenz's characterization of what these laws are aimed to do.
But it is true, though, that the ACLU has withdrawn support from historic laws like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was signed by Bill Clinton. It's been in place for 20 years and applies to all kinds of scenarios that it relates to religious liberty. So their position has shifted largely because of their view about the issue of marriage being between a man and a woman.
So I'd like to clarify that, because actually the ACLU was part of the cross-collaborative effort here in Texas.
I'm talking about the federal level.
Texas RFRA.
Right. I'm talking about at the federal level. The ACLU's federal group has withdrawn their support of the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and that is a fact.
Jonathan, you're opposed to the concept of same-sex marriage or gender-neutral marriage?
I support marriage between a man and a woman.
But if marriage, but you're a supporter of marriage, and I think your organization is. I mean, it seems to me that if you're going to embrace marriage, and then that is the law of the land, do you see a future where there's a common ground? I guess
Yet another example of not following the Constitution.
That's not true.
And what your position is that the Bible trumps the Constitution.
Look, you're
right?
talking to someone who was a law student and sued the University of Houston when government officials here at U of H said that my constitutional rights didn't allow me to have free speech for the pro-life issues, and we won that lawsuit. So I know the Constitution and I know Supreme Court law. And when it comes to this issue, there's no question that marriage is between a man and a woman, particularly as Christians. That's something that I believe, But there are people that are same-sex, that are homosexual. We have worked on religious liberty issues. You want to talk about common ground? You look at some people that worked on issues at the legislature, people like Jason Vaughn, who is a very out homosexual man, and he's worked on pro-life issues with us. He's even worked to support the Pastor Protection Act, which says that churches should not be penalized or pulled into jail or to court so they're not getting forced to perform marriages that go against their beliefs. That is what folks want in the LGBT movement, some of them. It's not good enough for them to only have their right to marry who they want and love who they want. They also want to punish people that believe it and want to operate their church and the business according to those beliefs. That is not what the Constitution demands.
30 seconds. We've got a tax cut benefiting the wealthy. We've got food stamp recipients that are supposed to work in order to get their food. Is there a war on the poor in the United States? Can you give me a yes or no in 20 seconds?
Could I switch the question over to the issues of gender equality
No.
that
Sure.
we were talking about? Because there are so many issues, I had to write them all down. There's
Well, we
issues
only
of
have 20 seconds. That's
pay
why I asked
equity,
you to.
we have sexual harassment, we have domestic abuse, we have anti-discrimination protection, we have sex trafficking, representation in leadership, absence of child care, and maternal mortality, all as issues that indicate, because when the question was posed initially was what is the state of gender equality in Houston, those are all factors that demonstrate that in fact we have made some progress, but we have far to go.
Well, thank you so much. We had a wonderful show. That is a wonderful red, white, and blue. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Dr. Gregory. Thank you, Kali Cohn. We'll be back next week with more red, white, and blue.